I keep having the same dream. I'm standing on Texas State Highway 130, that long stretch of toll road connecting San Antonio to Austin. It's always 3:17 a.m. The digital clock on my booth dashboard never changes. The highway stretches endlessly in both directions, disappearing into darkness despite my booth's fluorescent lights. Then I see it. A pair of headlights in the distance, approaching slowly. Too slowly. The car is still too far to make out, but something feels wrong about how it moves, jerky, unnatural. The radio in my booth crackles with static before a voice cuts through. Don't look directly at the driver. I always wake up drenched in sweat right after that, my heart hammering against my ribs like it's trying to escape. The thing is, I've only been working this toll booth job for 3 weeks. The dream started before I ever set foot in booth 19. My name is Marcos Ruiz. Until 2 months ago, I was living in Houston, working as an automotive technician at a failing garage in the 5th Ward. When the shop closed down, I had exactly 3 weeks of savings before I wouldn't be able to make rent. The job market was brutal. Seems like everyone's struggling these days. That's when my cousin Ernesto called. He'd moved to Lockhart years ago, small town about 30 miles south of Austin. Said there was a job opening at the Texas Department of Transportation for a night shift toll collector on the SH-130 extension. The pay wasn't great, but they provided a small studio apartment in employee housing just outside of Lockhart as part of a compensation. It's boring as hell, Primo, but it'll keep you afloat until something better comes along, Ernesto had said. Plus, Lockhart's got the best barbecue in Texas. You could do worse. I wasn't in a position to be picky, so I packed my few belongings into my 2008 Ford Ranger and drove the 165 miles west to Lockhart. The town itself is small, about 14,000 people, and proud of its designation as the barbecue capital of Texas. Downtown has that preserved historic look, with brick buildings from the 1800s housing restaurants like Crike's Market and Black's Barbecue, places locals treat with religious reverence. My new home was a modest one-bedroom unit in a small complex on the outskirts of town, just off of FM 20. Nothing special, but clean enough. The orientation for my new job was brief. Just basic instructions on operating the cash register, credit card machine, and the gate mechanism. Highway's pretty dead at night, my supervisor, Bill Thornton, had explained. SH-130 was supposed to be this big alternative to the congested I-35 corridor, but the tolls are so high most locals avoid it. You'll get some truckers and the occasional lost tourist, but mostly it's just you in the darkness. What Bill didn't mention were the rules. I learned about them on my first night from Daryl, the guy I was replacing. He was in his 60s, white-haired and weathered, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept properly in years. "Listen carefully," he'd said, sliding a folded piece of paper across the small desk in booth 19. "I don't care what they told you in orientation. These are the real rules for the night shift. Follow them, and you'll be fine. Ignore them." He trailed off, staring at the empty highway. "Well, just don't." I'd laughed, thinking it was some kind of hazing ritual for the new guy. But Daryl didn't crack a smile. "This ain't a joke, son. SH-130 ain't like other highways, especially not at night. They built this stretch right through old ranch land with a history." His eyes had met mine, deadly serious. Bad history. I took the paper, still skeptical, but unsettled by his intensity. There were 7 rules written in shaky handwriting. "Why are you leaving if you know how to stay safe?" I'd asked. Daryl had glanced nervously at the empty toll lanes outside the booth. "Because eventually, Everybody makes a mistake. That was 3 weeks ago. I've been on the night shift since then, alone in booth 19 from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., watching the occasional vehicle pass through. I've followed the rules without really believing they mattered. Until last night, when I learned why Daryl's hands had trembled as he wrote them down. I should probably tell you about the rules before I explain what happened last night. Booth 19 sits at the northernmost toll plaza on SH 130, just before the highway curves northeast toward Mustang Ridge. It's the last staffed booth on this stretch. Everything else is electronic tags and cameras. According to Bill, they keep this one manned at night because the equipment tends to malfunction after dark. Now I understand that's a convenient lie. My booth is small, barely 8 feet square with windows on all sides, a desk with a computer terminal, cash drawer, and credit card machine. There's a mini fridge under the desk, a microwave on a shelf, and a small bathroom tucked in the back corner. The lighting is harsh fluorescent, which creates a bubble of sterile brightness in the surrounding darkness. Beyond that light, there's nothing but the empty highway and the vast Texas night. Daryl's list of rules has been taped to the inside of my desk drawer for 3 weeks. I only looked at it occasionally, treating it like some quaint superstition. The official TX manual sits ignored on the shelf. Nothing in there about what really happens on this road. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Here are the 7 rules, exactly as Daryl wrote them. Rule 1. Never leave booth 19 between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. for any reason. Rule 2. If a vehicle approaches with its headlights flashing in a pattern, not just high beams, close your service window, look down at your desk, and do not look up until you hear it pass. Rule 3. If a caller on the emergency phone asks, "Is this the way to San Antonio?" respond only with, "Stay on I-35. Nothing else, no matter what they say afterward. Rule 4. If you see something moving in the fields beyond the toll lanes that isn't a vehicle, pretend you don't see it. Do not acknowledge it. Do not talk about it, even to yourself. Rule 5. If a driver hands you exact change but the coins are unnaturally warm, drop them directly into the cash drawer. Do not touch warm coins for more than 5 seconds. Rule 6. At exactly 3:17 a.m., turn off your radio or any music you're playing for 3 minutes. If you hear voices coming from it while it's off, do not respond to them. Rule 7. If a blue pickup truck with the license plate LVS2HNT stops at your booth, process the toll as normal, but do not make eye contact with anyone in the vehicle. When they leave, take your break immediately and rinse your face with cold water. I've spent nights browsing Reddit on my phone, watching movies on my laptop, and reading books to pass the time. Most nights I'd see maybe 15 to 20 vehicles total. Truckers mostly, a few night shift workers from Austin or San Antonio, and the occasional lost tourist. Nothing strange, nothing that would justify Daryl's paranoia. Until 3 nights ago. It started with a call on the emergency phone, a landline mounted on the wall that connects directly to TXDOT's control center. At least, that's what it's supposed to do. It rang at 2:13 a.m. I picked it up, expecting a dispatcher or maybe a stranded motorist who'd found one of the emergency call boxes along the highway. "Toll booth 19, this is Marcos," I answered. Silence at first, then a voice, distorted and distant like there was a bad connection. "Is this the way to San Antonio?" I froze. Rule 3 flashed in my mind, but I hesitated. This had to be a coincidence. You can take this highway south, but I-35 is more direct," I replied, ignoring the rule. More silence. Then the voice spoke again, lower this time. with a strange wet quality to it that raised the hair on my arms. I asked, "Is this the way to San Antonio?" My mouth went dry. "Stay only 35, I said quickly. The line went dead immediately. I stood there holding the receiver, suddenly aware of how isolated I was in my little illuminated box in the darkness. That night, nothing else happened. I convinced myself it was just Ernesto or one of his friends messing with me. Maybe Daryl had told them about the rules as a joke, and they were having fun scaring the new guy. The next night was uneventful until about 2:45 a.m., when I noticed headlights in the distance, approaching from the south. Nothing unusual there, but as the vehicle got closer, I realized the headlights were flashing. Not just high beams, but a distinct pattern. 2 quick flashes, pause, 3 quick flashes, pause, 2 again. Rule 2. My heart began racing as I watched the vehicle approach. It was a dark sedan, too far away to make out the model or license plate. The rational part of my brain said this was probably just a car with faulty wiring, or someone sending signals to a friend up ahead. But something deeper, more primitive, was screaming at me to close the window. I waited too long. The car was only about 100 yards away when I finally snapped out of it and slammed the service window shut. I looked down at my desk as instructed, my pulse pounding in my ears. The car slowed as it approached my booth. Through the windows, I could see its headlights casting strange, shifting shadows inside my booth, still flashing in that unnatural pattern. The vehicle stopped completely at my window. I kept my eyes fixed on my desk, resisting the overwhelming urge to look up. There was a tapping on the window, gentle at first, then more insistent. A voice called out, muffled through the glass. "Excuse me, sir? I need some directions." The voice sounded normal enough, but I remembered Daryl's rules and kept my eyes down. The tapping continued for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then, unexpectedly, I heard what sounded like claws scratching against the glass. I almost looked up then. Almost. But some instinct kept my eyes glued to my desk. After another minute, I heard the engine rev, and the car pulled away slowly. Only when the sound of the engine had completely faded did I dare to look up. There were 5 deep scratches on the outside of my service window that hadn't been there before. After those first 2 incidents, I began taking Daryl's rules seriously. I dug out his phone number from the employee contact sheet and called him the next morning. The conversation didn't reassure me. "You broke Rule 3, didn't you?" He didn't sound accusatory, just resigned. "How did you know?" "Because they always call new collectors, and new collectors always mess up the first time." He sighed heavily. "Did anything else happen? Flashing headlights? Warm coins?" My blood ran cold. The headlights. A car came with a pattern of flashes. "Did you look at the driver?" Number I followed the rule that time. "Good." The relief in his voice was palpable. "Listen carefully, Marcos. They know about you now. Things will escalate. They always do. I'd tell you to quit, but..." He paused. "It's too late for that. Once they notice you, leaving just makes it worse." "Who are they?" I demanded. Another long pause. "You ever hear stories about the old King Ranch lands? Before the highway? No. The native tribes, Cahuiltecans, later the Comanche, they had stories about something that lived in these parts, something that hungered. The Spanish called it El que se alimenta, the one that feeds. But the old-timers around Lockhart have another name for it." "What's that?" "Skinwalker, Wendigo. Different names for the same hunger." His voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "Story goes that back in the 1800s, there was a terrible drought. Ranchers were desperate. One of them made a deal with something. The drought broke. But after that, people started disappearing off that stretch of road. The land got a bad reputation. And you believe that? Doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is what happens on that road at night. He coughed. When they built SH-130, they disturbed something that was sleeping. Now we're just trying to maintain a balance. Why doesn't TxDOT shut it down? Darryl laughed bitterly. You think they don't know? Where do you think those rules came from? Look, just follow them. To the letter. It's your only chance now. He hung up before I could ask any more questions. That night, I arrived at booth 19 with a thermos of coffee and a new resolve to follow every rule precisely. The first few hours passed uneventfully. A few trucks, a minivan with a tired-looking family, all normal transactions. At 1:23 a.m., I noticed movement in my peripheral vision, something in the fields beyond the toll lanes. Following Rule 4, I deliberately looked away and focused on my computer screen. Whatever it was, it kept moving, just at the edge of my vision. Something tall and thin, weaving through the mesquite trees and scrub brush. I started humming to myself, trying to drown out the occasional sound of twigs snapping or brush rustling. The movement continued for almost an hour, before stopping abruptly. Only then did I allow myself a quick glance outside. Nothing there, just the dark Texas night. At 2:55 a.m., a late-model Chevrolet Silverado pulled up to my booth. The driver, a middle-aged Hispanic man in work clothes, handed me a $20 for the $8.95 toll. As I gave him his change, 3 quarters, a nickel, and a dime, I noticed he was watching me intently. "Everything okay tonight?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "Fine," I answered, trying to sound casual. "Just a quiet night." "You sure about that?" He nodded toward the field where I'd seen the movement earlier. "Looks like you might have company." I followed Rule 4 and pretended not to understand. "Just me here at night," I said with a forced smile. He held my gaze for an uncomfortable moment, then nodded slowly. "You take care now. They say this stretch gets mighty strange after midnight." He put his truck in gear but hesitated. "If I were you, I'd keep salt in my pockets. Old ranch remedy." Before I could respond, he drove off, his taillights disappearing around the bend. At 3:17 a.m. precisely, I remembered Rule 6 and turned off the small radio I had playing. The silence that followed was oppressive, heavy. I sat motionless, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint sound of wind outside. 2 minutes into the silence, the radio crackled. It was off. I'd checked twice, but static buzzed from its speakers, followed by a voice so quiet I had to strain to hear it. "We see you, Collector." My stomach clenched. I gripped the arms of my chair, focusing on my breathing, trying not to react. "We know you broke the rules. We know you answered wrongly." The static increased, the voice becoming clearer. Hungry for so long. I bit my tongue to keep from responding, my knuckles white as I gripped the chair. "Look outside. We want you to see us." I kept my eyes fixed on the desk, counting the seconds until the 3 minutes were up. The radio continued to spit static and half-formed words, but I tuned them out, focusing only on my watch. When the 3 minutes finally passed, I jabbed the power button on the radio. Instantly, normal late-night talk radio resumed, as if nothing had happened. My hands were shaking so badly, I spilled coffee on my pants when I tried to take a sip. This was real. All of it. At 4:05 a.m., a customer pulled up in a rundown Honda Civic. The driver was a young woman, early 20s maybe, with dark circles under her eyes. She handed me exact change for the toll: 3 quarters, 2 dimes, and a nickel. The coins were hot. Not warm like they'd been in a pocket, but hot, like they'd been held over a flame. When they touched my palm, I nearly dropped them in surprise. Rule 5 flashed in my mind, and I immediately dumped them into the cash drawer, my fingers tingling where the coins had touched. "Something wrong?" the woman asked, her expression neutral, but her eyes too focused, too aware for 4 a.m. "No, ma'am," I replied, forcing a smile. "You're good to go." She didn't move. "You sure? You look like you've seen a ghost." Her lips curled into a smile that showed too many teeth. Or something worse. "Just tired," I said, fighting the urge to close the window. "Long shift." "I bet it is," she said, still not moving. "Lonely out here. No one to hear you if something happened." I swallowed hard. "Have a good night, ma'am." She stared at me for a moment longer, then finally drove away. As she passed through, I noticed there was no license plate on her car. I looked down at my palm where the coins had touched. 5 small, perfectly circular burns marked my skin. When 5 a.m. finally came, I felt a weight lift. According to Rule 1, the danger hours were over. But as I was logging the night's transactions, the emergency phone rang again. I hesitated, then picked it up. "Booth 19, this is Marcos." Heavy breathing, then that same voice from before. "You think it ends at dawn, Collector?" My throat constricted. "What do you want?" "The old rules are changing," the voice said, wet and guttural. "We're hungry. So hungry. One mistake isn't enough anymore." "What does that mean?" "It means we're coming for you. Tonight." The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, ice spreading through my veins. When my replacement arrived at 6 a.m., I didn't tell him anything. What could I say? That the highway was haunted? That something was hunting me? I drove back to my apartment in Lockhart as the sun rose, casting long shadows across the landscape. For the first time, those shadows looked like fingers reaching for me. I couldn't sleep when I got back to my apartment. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that woman's too wide smile, felt the burning coins in my palm. The 5 circular burns hadn't faded. If anything, they seemed to be getting more pronounced, forming a constellation-like pattern across my skin. I needed answers. My phone conversation with Daryl had only given me fragments. Against my better judgment, I drove into downtown Lockhart. The town was already bustling with its modest morning traffic, locals heading to work, and tourists making pilgrimages to the barbecue joints. The Caldwell County Courthouse sat in the center of town, a 3-story sandstone building with a clock tower and Romanesque architecture that seemed out of place in this small Texas town. Next door was the Dr. Eugene Clark Library, the oldest continuously operating public library in Texas, according to the plaque outside. If anywhere in Lockhart had information about local history, it would be here. The library was cool and quiet inside, with high ceilings and the musty smell of old books. I approached the reference desk, where a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and glasses perched on her nose was sorting through a stack of papers. "Excuse me," I said. "I'm looking for information about local history, specifically about the old ranch lands where Highway 130 was built." She looked up, studying me over her glasses. "Local history, huh? Any particular aspect you're interested in?" I hesitated. "Folklore, I guess. Old stories. Particularly anything about unusual occurrences. Disappearances, maybe." Something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe concern. "You work the toll booth, don't you?" she asked, her voice lowered. "Booth 19? I stared at her, surprised. "How did you know?" She sighed, glancing around to make sure no one was within earshot. "We get one of you in here every few months. You all ask the same questions." She came around from behind the desk. "Come with me." She led me to a section at the back of the library, where a small room housed local historical records. Most of what you're looking for won't be in the general circulation, she explained, pulling a key from her pocket and unlocking a cabinet. Some of these materials are sensitive. From the cabinet, she retrieved a bound folder of newspaper clippings, a leather journal that looked at least a century old, and a stack of photocopied documents. "I'm Margaret, by the way," she said, placing the materials on a table. "My family's been in Lockhart since before it was Lockhart. My great-grandfather worked for the King Ranch in the 1880s. "Marcos," I replied, eyeing the materials. "What exactly am I looking at here? History that doesn't make it into the tourist brochures." She opened the folder of newspaper clippings. "These are all reports of disappearances and unusual deaths along what's now the SH-130 corridor, dating back to 1887. The yellowed clippings told a disturbing story. Every few years, people had vanished along the old ranch roads and trails that eventually became part of the highway system. Travelers, ranch hands, later motorists, gone without explanation. The most recent clip was from just 2 years ago. Toll worker found dead near Mustang Ridge, animal attack suspected. "That was Jeremy Thorne," Margaret said softly. "Worked the booth before your friend Daryl took over." I swallowed hard. How did he die, really? Margaret's eyes met mine. Officially, coyote attack. But Jeremy's body was found over 20 miles from the toll booth, with no vehicle nearby. And the wounds... She shook her head. "My nephew works for the sheriff's department. Said it looked like something had been feeding." She pushed the leather journal toward me. "This belonged to Edward Lockhart, the town's founder. He recorded stories from the local tribes about what lived in these parts. The Tonkawa called it Dehmak, the hunger that walks. The Spanish settlers later called it a chupacabra or pishtaco, but that wasn't accurate." I opened the journal carefully, the leather cracking slightly. Edward Lockhart's handwriting was elegant but cramped, covering every inch of the pages with observations and sketches. One page showed a crude drawing of a tall, emaciated figure with elongated limbs and an antlered head. The caption beneath read, "The Wendigo, as described by Red Hawk of the Tonkawa, December 1855. A spirit of insatiable hunger that can mimic human form." Next to it was a list of signs and warnings that made my blood freeze. 1. Animals avoid certain stretches of road or trail. 2. Strange lights that move in patterns. 3. Voices calling from empty spaces. 4. Objects uncomfortably hot or cold to touch. 5. The scent of copper and rot on still air. "This is what's out there, isn't it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "At the toll booth," Margaret nodded grimly. "The tribes had rituals to appease it. Later, the ranchers developed their own methods, rules to follow to stay safe. When they built the highway, they disturbed old grounds, sacred places, warning places. But why keep the toll booth open? Why not shut it down?" She gave me a long look. "You think the state doesn't know? They've studied the accident rates on that stretch, disappearance statistics, cost-benefit analysis." Her mouth twisted bitterly. "Turns out a few missing toll workers every decade is cheaper than rerouting the major highway or dealing with whatever might happen if no one is there to follow the rules." I ran my hands through my hair, trying to process everything. "So what do I do? They said they're coming for me tonight." Margaret's eyes widened slightly. "They spoke to you directly? That's unusual and concerning." She pulled the stack of photocopied documents forward. "These are records from people who survived encounters, detailed accounts, along with additional rules and protective measures not in your standard list." "There are more rules?" "The 7 rules keep the balance, but they don't protect you if you've already broken one. She tapped the papers. These might. I spent the next hour poring over the accounts. Toll workers, highway patrol officers, stranded motorists, all describing encounters with something inhuman on that stretch of road. The descriptions varied. Sometimes a deer-like creature walking on two legs. Sometimes a gaunt human with two long limbs. Sometimes something that looked human until you noticed the eyes or the teeth or the way it moved. The protective measures were consistent, though. Salt across thresholds, iron nails, specific words and phrases in various languages, and rituals, precise sequences of actions that seemed to repel or confuse the entities. One account from 1997 caught my attention. A toll worker named Garcia who claimed to have survived a direct confrontation. It came at 3:17 like they always do. But I was ready. I had lined the booth with salt and iron nails at each corner. When it appeared, looking like my brother, who I knew was dead for 5 years by then, I recited the words the old Lockhart woman taught me. Mi sangre no es para compartir, mi alma no es para tomar. My blood is not to share, my soul is not to take. It screamed then, a sound like metal tearing, and threw itself against the booth window. The glass held. I kept reciting the words until dawn broke, and it retreated back into the fields, moving like a broken marionette. But I knew it would return. They always return, if they've marked you. I left Lockhart the next day, and never spent another night in Texas. As I finished reading, I looked up at Margaret, who had been watching me silently. "Will these protections work?" I asked. She shrugged slightly. "They've worked for some, others." She gestured to the newspaper clippings. "The Wendigo is patient and adaptive. The older protections work better than newer ones. They learn, you see." I copied down everything that seemed useful, the phrases, the rituals, the protective measures. Margaret provided me with a small cloth bag filled with rock salt and 4 iron nails that looked hand-forged. "These belonged to my grandfather," she said. "Real iron, not the modern stuff. Place them at the 4 corners of your booth." As I prepared to leave, I had one last question. "Why are you helping me? Most people would think I'm crazy." Margaret's face softened slightly. "My brother worked that booth in 1979. He didn't follow the rules." She took a deep breath. What they found wasn't enough to bury. I thanked her and left, my mind reeling with everything I'd learned. On the drive back to my apartment, I stopped at a Catholic supply store in San Marcos and bought a small vial of holy water and a St. Christopher medal, the patron saint of travelers. I wasn't religious, but I wasn't taking chances either. Back at my apartment, I tried to sleep, but couldn't. I kept seeing that antlered figure from Lockhart's journal, imagining it watching me from the fields beyond the toll booth. Evening came too quickly. As I prepared for my shift, I packed the salt, the nails, the holy water, and the medal into my work bag. I wrote the protective phrase on my forearm with a permanent marker. Mi sangre no es para compartir, mi alma no es para tomar. The sun was setting as I drove to booth 19, painting the sky blood red. It felt like a warning. Whatever was coming tonight, I would be ready. I had to be. I arrived at booth 19 30 minutes early for my shift. The sunset had given way to darkness, and as I parked my truck in the small employee lot behind the toll plaza, I felt the weight of the night pressing down on me. The day shift operator, a portly man named Rick, raised his eyebrows when I walked in. "You're early," he said, gathering his things. "Everything okay?" "You look like hell." "Just couldn't sleep," I replied, setting my bag down. "Anything I should know about?" Rick shrugged. "Quiet day. System went down for about 10 minutes around noon, but IT fixed it remotely." He eyed me curiously. "You sure you're good? You've got this intensity about you." "I'm fine," I lied, just anxious to get started. Rick didn't look convinced, but he didn't press. "All right then, have a good one." As soon as he left, I got to work. I had about 20 minutes before my shift officially began at 10 p.m., 20 minutes to prepare the booth. First, I took out the 4 iron nails Margaret had given me and placed one in each corner of the booth, carefully pressing them into the thin carpet. Next, I took the rock salt and poured a thin line across the threshold of the door and another along the base of the service window. I wasn't sure if it would help. The window had to open for transactions, but it was better than nothing. I hung the St. Christopher medal from the small rearview mirror that extended from the ceiling, allowing toll operators to see approaching vehicles from behind. Then I pulled out the small vial of holy water and sprinkled a few drops on the computer terminal, the phone, and the radio. Finally, I pulled out a sheet of paper where I'd rewritten all 7 of the original rules, along with the additional protections I'd learned from the accounts in the library. I taped this to the underside of the desk where I could easily reference it. At precisely 10 p.m., I logged into the system and officially began my shift. The highway was quiet, just the occasional whoosh of a vehicle passing through one of the automated toll lanes nearby. Booth 19 was the only manned station at this hour. My first customer came through at 10:23 p.m., a tired-looking woman in a Subaru with 2 sleeping children in the back seat. The transaction was normal, reassuringly mundane. For the next 2 hours, I had sporadic traffic, mostly truckers and a few late-night travelers. Nothing unusual happened until 12:47 a.m. I was midway through a transaction with a trucker hauling produce from the Rio Grande Valley when I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. Something tall moving through the field beyond the toll plaza. Following Rule 4, I deliberately kept my focus on the truck driver, completing his toll payment without looking toward the field. But I could feel it watching me. A heavy, malevolent presence just beyond the lights of the toll plaza. "You all right, son?" the trucker asked, noticing my tension. "Yeah, fine," I said, handing him his receipt. "Drive safe." He glanced in the direction I was avoiding. "You seeing things out there?" I remembered what Margaret had said about how the Wendigo could mimic human form. I kept my eyes fixed on his, looking for any sign that this wasn't really a trucker, but something else. "Just tired," I answered carefully. He nodded slowly, his expression sympathetic. "This stretch has a reputation, you know. A lot of truckers avoid it at night, even with the lighter traffic. Say they see things, hear things." He lowered his voice. "My buddy Ramirez swears something followed him for 20 miles last month. Something running alongside his rig at 65 miles per hour. I swallowed hard. "What did he do?" "Prayed," the trucker said simply. "And didn't stop until he hit Austin." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden cross, placing it on the counter. "Keep this with you. Might help." Before I could thank him, he pulled away, his taillights fading into the darkness. I picked up the cross, turning it over in my hand. It was handmade, the wood smooth from years of handling. I placed it next to the computer terminal, another small defense. As 1 a.m. approached, the beginning of the danger hours, according to Rule 1, I checked all my protections again. The salt lines were intact. The iron nails remained in position. The cross and medal were visible. The phrase remained clear on my forearm. I remembered the account I'd read about the toll worker who survived, Garcia. He had said the entity came at 3:17 a.m. That was still hours away, but somehow I knew I wouldn't have to wait that long. Not tonight. At 1:13 a.m., the emergency phone rang. I stared at it, my heart pounded. On the fourth ring, I picked it up. "Booth 19, this is Marcos," I answered, my voice steadier than I felt. Silence on the line. Then the familiar wet, guttural breathing. "We're coming, Collector. Your protections won't save you." I gripped the receiver tightly. "Mi sangre no es para compartir. Mi alma no es para tomar," I said, the Spanish phrase feeling clumsy on my tongue. A hissing sound came through the line, like air escaping from a punctured tire. The old words, "You've been talking to the library woman." The voice chuckled, a thick, mucus-filled sound. Her brother tasted sweet, like fear and desperation. My blood ran cold, but I repeated the phrase again, more firmly. "We adapt, Collector. We learn. The old ways fade." The voice dropped to a whisper. "Look outside. I'm wearing a face, you know." Despite every instinct screaming not to, I found my eyes drawn to the window. There, at the edge of the light cast by the toll plaza, stood a figure. It looked like Ernesto, my cousin. Same build, same stance, same face I'd known my whole life. But even from this distance, I could see the wrongness. The eyes too large, the limbs slightly too long, the smile too wide. "Come out, Primo," it called, Ernesto's voice perfect down to the slight Texas drawl. "I need to talk to you. It's important." Rule 1 echoed in my mind. Never leave booth 19 between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. for any reason. "No," I called back, my voice shaking. "You're not him." The thing wearing my cousin's face tilted its head at an angle no human neck could achieve. Smart boy. But it doesn't matter. I'll wear other faces. I'll find one you can't resist. As if to demonstrate, the figure shimmered slightly, its form blurring like heat waves on hot asphalt. When it solidified again, it had taken the shape of my mother. "Marcos," it called, her voice achingly familiar, the voice that had sung me to sleep as a child. "Mi hijo, por favor. I need your help." My throat tightened. Even knowing what it was, seeing my mother's face, hearing her voice, it pierced something primal in me. I pressed my hands against the counter to stop myself from moving toward the door. "You're not her," I said, more to myself than to it. "You're not her." The thing laughed with my mother's laugh, but distorted, stretched too thin. "We'll see how strong your resolve is, Collector. The night is young, and we are very, very hungry." The figure retreated beyond the circle of light, but I could still feel it out there, watching, waiting, testing me. I checked my phone, 1:27 a.m., nearly 4 hours until the danger period ended, 4 hours to survive whatever came next. At 1:45 a.m., a car pulled up to my booth, an ordinary-looking Jeep Wrangler with a University of Texas sticker on the back window. The driver, a college-aged guy with a backwards baseball cap, handed me a 20 for the toll. "Hey, ma'am," he said casually. "Some weird dude is back there waving at cars. Tried to flag me down about a mile back. Might want to call the cops or something." My stomach dropped. "What did he look like?" The student shrugged. "Older Hispanic dude, maybe 50? Said his car broke down, but I didn't see any vehicle. Seemed sketchy, so I kept driving." It was trying another approach, luring in potential help for a stranded motorist. I thanked the student and gave him his change, watching as he drove away. As the night wore on, I became increasingly certain that whatever was out there was methodically testing my limits, looking for weaknesses. It had tried appealing to family bonds. It had tried to use innocent bystanders. What would come next? I was about to find out as the clock ticked closer to 2 a.m. and headlights appeared on the horizon, a blue pickup truck approaching my booth. I glanced at my list of rules and felt the blood drain from my face. Rule 7. If a blue pickup truck with the license plate LVS2HNT stops at your booth, process the toll as normal, but do not make eye contact with anyone in the vehicle. The truck drew closer, and with a sinking feeling, I made out the license plate in my rearview mirror. LVS2HNT. Loves to hunt. My hand instinctively went to the St. Christopher medal as the blue pickup slowed to a stop at my window. It was an older model Ford F-150. The blue paint faded and chipped in places, with a gun rack visible in the back window. Empty, thankfully, but clearly used. I kept my eyes down as I slid open the service window. "Evening," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "That'll be $8.95. "Evenin'," replied a deep, gravelly voice with a thick Texas drawl. A weathered hand extended a $10 bill. I could see dirt under the fingernails and calluses that spoke of hard work. The hand looked human enough. I took the money, careful not to let our fingers touch, and made change without looking up. $1.05. I counted it twice to be sure, focusing on the coins in my palm. "You're the new boy, ain't ya?" the voice asked. "Daryl's replacement." I nodded slightly, still avoiding eye contact as Rule 7 dictated. "Yes, sir. Been here about 3 weeks now." A low chuckle. 3 weeks? Longer than most last once they start noticing things. My pulse quickened. I placed the change in the outstretched hand, my eyes fixed on the transaction, not on the driver. "You know what's out there, don't you, son?" "In them fields?" The voice had dropped lower, almost conspiratorial. "Older than Texas, that thing. Older than the Comanche, even. Been hunting these lands since before men had names for it." I swallowed hard. "Your change is $1.05, sir. Drive safely." The hand withdrew with the money, but the truck didn't move. I could feel the driver's eyes on me, studying me, waiting for me to look up. "Them rules Daryl gave you, they worked fine for a time. But times change. The hungry one grows bolder every year." The driver sighed, a sound like wind through dry grass. "Some of us have been keeping it in check, following older rules, making certain arrangements." I remembered Margaret's words about ranchers developing their own methods to appease the entity. "What kind of arrangements?" I asked, still keeping my gaze lowered. "Balance, boy. That's what it's all about. It needs to feed. Better it takes the ones we choose than takes at random." The engine revved slightly. "There's a meeting tonight, out at the old Caldwell Ranch House. Midnight. Folk who understand what needs doing." My skin crawled at the implication. "You're selecting people for it to take?" Another chuckle, darker this time. "Sometimes the old ways are the only ways that work. You should join us. Better to be on the right side of the equation." I shook my head. "I'm not interested." "You will be," the driver said with certainty. "When it comes for you in earnest, you'll wish you'd listened. The toll must be paid, one way or another." The truck began to pull away, but not before the driver added, "Check your back pocket, son. Little gift for you." As the blue pickup disappeared into the night, I reached into my back pocket, confused. I hadn't put anything there. My fingers touched something cool and metallic. I pulled it out, a small silver coin, antique-looking, with strange symbols etched around its edge. I dropped it immediately, remembering Rule 5 about warm coins. This one wasn't warm. It was cold, unnaturally so, leaving a numbing sensation on my fingertips. How had it gotten into my pocket? I hadn't felt anyone place it there. Following my instincts, I grabbed a tissue from the desk and picked up the coin without touching it directly. I examined it under the fluorescent light. One side showed what looked like a deer with human features, its antlers elongated and twisted. The other side bore an inscription in a language I didn't recognize, angular letters that seemed to shift slightly as I looked at them. I wrapped the coin in the tissue and placed it in the empty coffee cup on my desk, not wanting to keep it in my pocket but not willing to throw it away either. Something told me it might be important. My phone rang. Not the emergency line, but my personal cell. The caller ID showed Ernesto's name. I hesitated. After seeing the thing outside wearing my cousin's face, I wasn't sure if this was really him or another trick. I answered cautiously. "Hello? Marcos? You okay, man?" It sounded like Ernesto. The same inflections, the same slight stutter on hard consonants. "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied, still wary. "What's up?" "Got a weird feeling I needed to check on you," Ernesto said. "Like something was wrong. You sure you're good?" I considered telling him everything. The rules, the encounters, the thing wearing his face. But what if this wasn't really him? What if this was another test? "I'm okay," I lied. "Just a quiet night at the booth." "If you say so." He paused. "Listen, I heard some of the guys at the garage talking today. About that toll booth. They get weird about it, clam up when I mention you're working there." My grip tightened on the phone. "What did they say?" "Not much. But Hector, you remember him? The old mechanic with the scar? He said something about feeding time and the hungry season. When I asked what he meant, he just said I should tell you to quit, like today." The same phrase that the thing on the phone had used. Hungry. Always hungry. "Thanks for the heads up," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I'll be careful." "There's something else," Ernesto added, his voice dropping. "I had a dream about you last night. You were at the toll booth, but there was something outside. Something watching you. It had these antlers, but it stood like a man." He paused. "Sounds loco, I know." Ice spread through my veins. Ernesto was having the same dream I'd been having. "It's just a dream," I said, not believing it myself. "Look, I should go. Got customers coming." After hanging up, I checked the time. 2:17 a.m. Still nearly 3 hours until the danger period ended at 5 a.m. I used the bathroom in the booth quickly, keeping an eye on the door the entire time. When I returned to my seat, I noticed something had changed. The salt line across the threshold had been disturbed. A small gap had appeared, as if something had carefully brushed some of the crystals aside. I hurried to repair it, pouring more salt to close the gap. As I did, I noticed a faint, unpleasant odor in the booth, the smell of wet fur and copper, like blood and animal musk. Something had been in here while I was in the bathroom, just a few feet away from me. At 2:45 a.m., as I sat hyper-aware of every sound and movement, a noise from outside caught my attention, the crunch of footsteps on gravel circling the booth. Slow, deliberate steps. "I know you can hear me, Collector," called a voice. Not Ernesto's or my mother's this time, but one I didn't recognize. "Your protections are weakening. The salt line is broken. The iron grows cold." I checked the nails in the corners. The one nearest the door had somehow been moved, no longer touching the corner of the room. I hadn't noticed it before. "We've been patient," the voice continued, closer now, just outside the window. "So patient. But the Blue Hunter has offered you to us. A trade for another year of peace." The blue pickup driver. He hadn't been warning me. He'd been marking me. I steeled myself and moved quickly to replace the nail, keeping my eyes averted from the windows. As I knelt in the corner, I heard a light tapping on the glass behind me. Tap, tap, tap. "Look at me, Marcos." The voice coaxed, gentle now, almost hypnotic. "Just one look. That's all it will take." I kept my eyes down, focusing on positioning the nail correctly. The tapping grew more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. Look at me. The voice was no longer gentle, but a roar that shook the booth, rattling the windows in their frames. I flinched, but didn't look up. Instead, I grabbed the vial of holy water and flicked a few drops toward the sound without looking. A hissing noise followed, like water on a hot skillet, and the presence retreated. Taking advantage of the moment, I checked all the protections again, reinforcing the salt lines and ensuring all 4 nails were properly positioned. I sprinkled more holy water around the booth and clutched the wooden cross the trucker had given me. At 3:16 a.m., 1 minute before the time mentioned in Rule 6, I turned off the radio as instructed. The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the usual sounds of the Texas night penetrated the booth. No crickets, no distant traffic, no wind in the mesquite trees. Nothing. I watched the seconds tick by on my watch. 3:16:45, 3:16:53, 16:55. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the fluorescent lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. The temperature in the booth plummeted, my breath suddenly visible in front of me. The coin in the coffee cup began to vibrate, producing a high-pitched ringing sound that made my teeth ache. And then, in the perfect silence, a voice spoke directly into my ear, as if someone, something, were standing right beside me. The old rules no longer bind us, Marcos Ruiz. We have evolved, adapted. The voice wasn't coming from the radio or the phone. It seemed to emanate from the air itself. Your soul will feed us for 100 years. I clutched the cross tighter, my knuckles white. Mi sangre no es para compartir, mi alma no es para tomar. I recited, my voice shaking. A sound like distant laughter replied, "Those words protected Garcia. They will not protect you." Something cold brushed against the back of my neck. Not a hand, but something like fingertips, if fingertips were made of ice and ended in points sharp enough to prick my skin. "We have tasted your fear already," the voice whispered. "So sweet, so rich. Your final moments will sustain us for so long." I closed my eyes, continuing to recite the protective phrase over and over. The cold touch withdrew, but I could still feel the presence circling me. "Open your eyes, Marcos," it said. "See what awaits you. See our true form." Despite everything, I felt my eyelids begin to lift, as if they were being pulled open by an external force. I fought against it, squeezing them shut, but the compulsion grew stronger. In desperation, I fumbled for the coin in the coffee cup. My fingers closed around it, the cold burning against my skin. Somehow, instinctively, I knew what to do. I held the coin up, eyes still closed. "I reject your hunger," I said firmly. "I am not your sacrifice." A shriek of rage filled the booth, so loud I had to cover my ears with my free hand. The presence recoiled, and suddenly the oppressive weight lifted. The temperature began to normalize, and the sounds of the night returned. Crickets, distant traffic, the hum of the fluorescent lights. I opened my eyes cautiously. The booth was empty. Beyond the windows, the toll plaza appeared normal. But I knew it wasn't over. The entity had retreated, but it hadn't given up. And I still had over an hour until 5 a.m. The coin felt impossibly cold against my palm, like holding a piece of deep winter. The symbols etched into its surface seemed to pulse, with a faint luminescence in the fluorescent lighting of the booth. Whatever this object was, it had power. Power the entity respected or feared. I examined it more carefully now, tracing the strange lettering with my fingertip. The sensation was odd, like touching something that existed partially in another place. The deer-human hybrid figure on one side, clearly a Wendigo representation, appeared almost three-dimensional. the antlers seeming to shift position slightly when viewed from different angles. As I studied it, my phone buzzed with a text message. Margaret from the library. "Are you still alive?" My hands shook as I typed back. "Yes. For now." "The coin works." 3 dots appeared as she typed, then, "What coin?" I snapped a quick photo and sent it to her. Seconds later, my phone rang. "Where did you get that?" Margaret's voice was urgent, almost panicked. "The driver of the blue pickup, the one from Rule 7, somehow slipped it into my pocket," I explained. "That's not possible," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That coin hasn't been seen in decades. It belonged to my grandfather. It was buried with him in 1971. A chill ran through me. "What is it exactly?" "A binding token, from the original agreement." She took a shaky breath. "When they built the first roads through these lands, certain arrangements were made. Sacrifices offered. Boundaries established. That coin was part of the binding. A physical manifestation of the contract." "Contract with what?" "With the hunger that walks," she said gravely. "The Wendigo. The original settlers believed that if they fed it regularly, livestock at first, then condemned criminals, it would leave others alone. My grandfather was the last official keeper of the bargain. After his death, the state took over the land, and the old ways were forgotten. The structured feedings stopped. So it started taking people randomly. For a while, until someone, I don't know who, established the toll booth system, the rules, a new way to maintain balance." She paused. "The coin showing up now. It means the balance is failing. The old contract is being invoked." "By who?" "The driver of the blue pickup." "The blue hunter," she corrected. "He's not a driver. He's a form the entity takes to interact with humans. A mask. A test." My blood ran cold. "I spoke to him. I took that coin." "Then you've been marked as a potential keeper," Margaret said, "or as a sacrifice." The smell of wet fur and copper returned suddenly, stronger than before. I looked up and froze. Standing just outside the booth, clearly visible under the harsh toll plaza lights, was a figure. It had the basic shape of a man: 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, a head. But everything about it was wrong. Its limbs were too long, joints bending at unnatural angles. The skin stretched over its gaunt frame was a mottled gray-brown, like a deer hide left too long in the sun. Atop its head rose a massive rack of antlers, far too large for its frame, branching and twisting upward like grasping hands. Its face was the worst part. Not quite deer, not quite human, with 2 large black eyes that reflected the booth's lights like mirrors, and a mouth that stretched far too wide across its elongated face, filled with sharp, yellowed teeth. It didn't move. It simply stood there, watching me through the glass, its chest barely moving with shallow breaths. "Margaret," I whispered into the phone. "It's here. I can see it. The Wendigo." "Don't look directly at it," she urged. "It can trap you with its gaze." I lowered my eyes, but kept the figure in my peripheral vision. "What do I do?" "The coin," she said. "Hold it up. Show it you have the token." I raised the coin, keeping my gaze averted. The entity made a sound, a low, guttural clicking that raised the hair on my arms. It took a step backward, away from the booth. "It's working," I whispered. "Listen carefully," Margaret said urgently. "The coin offers temporary protection, but it's also an invitation. The blue hunter gave it to you as a choice. Become the new keeper or become food." "What does that mean, become the keeper?" "It means you'd be responsible for selecting sacrifices, for feeding it, for maintaining the balance." Her voice was grim. That's what my grandfather did. What his father did before him. They chose who would disappear on these roads. The creature outside took another step back, its head tilting at an impossible angle as it studied me through the glass. "I won't do that," I said firmly. "I won't sacrifice innocent people." "Then you need another way to appease it." She paused. "There's a rule Daryl didn't write down. A rule my grandfather told me never to speak of unless absolutely necessary." "Tell me," I pleaded, watching as the Wendigo began to circle the booth slowly, its movements jerky yet fluid, like a marionette controlled by a drunken puppeteer. "Rule 8, Margaret said quietly. "If all other protections fail, and the hunger approaches in its true form, offer it blood freely given, not taken. 3 drops on the coin, then cast the coin outside the booth. Your willingly offered blood will satisfy it for 1 cycle." "Blood sacrifice?" I asked incredulously. "A token sacrifice," she corrected. "Freely given, not taken by force. There's a difference. One maintains the balance without surrendering your humanity. The other..." She didn't finish the thought. The Wendigo had completed its circle of the booth, and now stood again before my window. Its mouth opened wider than should be physically possible, revealing row upon row of jagged teeth. A long, purple-black tongue snaked out, licking the glass of my window with a wet, rasping sound. "I think I need to try Rule 8, I said, my voice shaking. "It's getting more aggressive." "Be careful," Margaret warned. "Once you invoke the blood offering, you'll be bound to the cycle. It will expect the same offering at the same time next month." The creature pressed its face against the glass, its breath fogging the window in uneven patches. The glass began to frost over from the unnatural cold emanating from its body. "I don't have much choice," I said. I put down the phone, keeping Margaret on the line. The Wendigo watched me with those reflective black eyes, tracking my every movement. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. With the coin in my left hand, I reached into my pocket with my right and pulled out my pocket knife. The creature's head tilted further, its antlers scraping against the booth's ceiling outside. It knew what I was doing. It was waiting. I flicked open the knife and, without giving myself time to reconsider, made a small cut across my thumb. Blood welled immediately, bright red against my skin. I held the coin under the wound and allowed 3 drops to fall onto the silver surface. The effect was immediate and startling. The blood didn't spread or run off the coin as normal liquid would. Instead, it was absorbed instantly, like water into parched earth. The symbols around the edge flared with a dull red light, and the coin grew warm in my palm. Not painfully hot, but a living warmth that pulsed like a heartbeat. The Wendigo outside made that clicking sound again, but more frantic now, excited. Its tongue pressed against the glass, leaving a smear of blackish saliva. Following my instincts, I moved to the door of the booth. The creature scuttled sideways to position itself directly outside. I unlocked the door and cracked it open just wide enough to throw the coin out onto the asphalt. The Wendigo dropped to all fours with shocking speed, its limbs contorting to accommodate the position. It pounced on the coin, snatching it up with those 2 long fingers. As it held the coin, the red glow spread from the metal up its arm, lines of crimson light tracing pathways through its body like illuminated veins. It threw its head back and made a sound, not a roar or a scream, but something between a sigh and a moan, a sound of satisfaction. Then it looked at me one last time, those black mirror eyes fixing on mine for a brief, terrifying moment. I felt something pass between us, an acknowledgement, a contract sealed. Then it was gone, loping away into the darkness beyond the toll plaza, moving with the speed and grace of a deer, but on 2 legs, its antlers bobbing as it disappeared into the night. I closed and locked the door with trembling hands, then picked up the phone. "It worked," I told Margaret. "It took the coin and left." "You've bought yourself time," she said. "But remember what I said. You're in the cycle now. It will return next month at the same time, expecting the same offering. If 3 drops of blood keep it from killing me or making me choose victims, I can live with that bargain," I said, slumping back into my chair. "That's how it starts," Margaret said quietly. "Small sacrifices that seem reasonable. But the hunger always grows, Marcos. It always wants more. That's its nature." After we hung up, I treated the small cut on my thumb and tried to process what had just happened. I had seen the Wendigo in its true form. I had made a blood pact with it, and according to Margaret, this was just the beginning. I checked the time, 3:42 a.m. Still over an hour until 5 a.m., when the danger period supposedly ended. But somehow I knew I was safe for tonight. The bargain had been struck. The hunger temporarily sated. As if to confirm my thoughts, the rest of the night was eerily quiet. No more strange vehicles. No calls on the emergency phone. No movement in the fields beyond the toll plaza. Just the occasional legitimate traveler passing through, completely unaware of what had transpired. When 5 a.m. finally arrived, I felt a subtle shift. Like a pressure I hadn't fully recognized had suddenly lifted. The first pale hints of dawn were visible on the eastern horizon, the stars beginning to fade from the Texas sky. I had survived the night, but at what cost? I was now bound to the Wendigo, committed to a monthly blood offering. And Margaret's warning echoed in my mind. The hunger always grows. As I logged the night's transactions and prepared for my replacement to arrive, I found myself wondering, what would happen if I simply left? If I packed my belongings and drove away from Lockhart, away from Texas altogether? Somehow, I already knew the answer. The coin had appeared in my pocket without my knowledge. The Wendigo had found me in my dreams before I ever set foot in booth 19. There was no running from this. I was part of the cycle now. The new keeper of a bargain older than the roads themselves. The next 4 weeks passed in a strange haze. I kept working the night shift at booth 19, following the original 7 rules religiously. Nothing unusual happened. No flickering headlights, no warm coins, no mysterious phone calls. It was as if the Wendigo was giving me space, honoring our bargain. Or perhaps it was simply biding its time. I spent my days researching everything I could find about Wendigo lore. The library became my second home, with Margaret guiding me through obscure texts and local historical records. The pieces came together slowly, revealing the history darker than I could have imagined. The entity had been in these lands for centuries, possibly millennia. The indigenous tribes had managed it through strict taboos and occasional sacrifices. When European settlers arrived, they encountered it too, interpreting it through their own cultural lens, sometimes as a demon, sometimes as a curse. The King Ranch had been built on land where the Wendigo had once been worshipped. The highway had disturbed ancient wards and boundaries. I learned that my predecessor, Jeremy Thorne, hadn't just been killed. According to Margaret's nephew at the sheriff's department, his body had been partially consumed. Not by coyotes, as the official report claimed, but by something that ate with terrible precision, taking only specific organs. Daryl had lasted longer because he'd figured out Rule 8 on his own, making monthly offerings. But eventually he'd grown careless or desperate. He'd tried to leave. The thing had followed him to Houston, where he was now in a psychiatric facility, having clawed out his own eyes after claiming he couldn't stop seeing it watching him. As the date of my next offering approached, I began having the dreams again. The Wendigo standing on the highway at 3:17 a.m., But now, instead of the warning voice telling me not to look at the driver, I heard a wet, chittering sound and words that made my blood freeze. The hunger grows. 3 days before the full cycle, I received a package at my apartment. No return address, no postmark. Inside was the silver coin, now restored to its original state, no trace of my blood visible on its surface. Accompanying it was a note written in shaky, spidery handwriting. The keeper's token returns to fulfill the bargain. That night I called Margaret. It sent back the coin, I told her, and a note calling me the keeper. She was silent for a long moment. My grandfather was called that, the keeper. Her voice trembled slightly. Marcos, you need to understand what this means. You're not just making an offering anymore. You're being inducted into a role. What exactly does a keeper do? I asked, though I feared I already knew. Maintains the balance, she said carefully. Makes sure the hunger is satisfied in controlled ways. You mean human sacrifice? I said flatly. Not at first, she replied. It starts with blood offerings. But eventually, she trailed off. I won't do that, I said firmly. I won't choose people to die. My grandfather said the same thing at first. Her voice was sad. But the Wendigo is patient and persuasive. It shows you alternatives that seem worse until its way feels like mercy. On the night of the full cycle, exactly 1 month after our first encounter, I arrived at booth 19 with the coin in my pocket and a growing sense of dread. Everything felt heightened. The fluorescent lights too bright. The silence between vehicles too absolute. The darkness beyond the toll plaza too complete. At 2 a.m., a familiar blue pickup pulled up to my booth. The license plate read LVS 2HNT. The same weathered hand extended a $10 bill. Evening, keeper, said the gravelly voice. Big night tonight. I took the money without looking up, following Rule 7. I'm not the keeper, I said. I just work here. A low chuckle. The token in your pocket says otherwise. It chose you, boy. Been a long time since it chose someone new. I made change mechanically. What happens if I refuse? If I don't make the offering tonight? The blue hunter was silent for a moment. Then it hunts without permission, without control. His voice dropped lower. Whole families gone. Accidents on the highway. School buses full of children vanishing on dark roads. It's happened before. My stomach twisted. That's a threat. No, son. That's the nature of the beast. It must feed. He took his change. Best make your choice. Better one drop willingly given than a flood taken by force. As he drove away, I noticed something in the road beyond my booth. 3 sets of headlights approaching slowly. A minivan, a sedan, and a motorcycle, all traveling together. I knew, somehow, that these weren't ordinary travelers. They were potential sacrifices presented for my consideration. The Wendigo was giving me a choice. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Choose one or lose all. Nausea rose in my throat. This was what Margaret had warned me about. The escalation. 3 drops of blood had satisfied it last time. Now it wanted more. As the vehicles approached, I could see the drivers clearly under the toll plaza lights. The minivan contained a family, mother, father, 2 sleepy children in the back. The sedan had a single occupant, an elderly man who looked half asleep himself. The motorcycle was driven by a young man, probably a college student. They reached my booth in that order. The family paid their toll with a credit card, the parents arguing quietly about directions. The elderly man fumbled with his wallet, apologizing for the delay. The college student handed me exact change, earbuds in, barely acknowledging my existence. As they all pulled away, my phone buzzed again. Choose, now. I clutched the coin in my pocket, feeling its unnatural cold. The Wendigo was forcing my hand, making me an accomplice. If I refused to choose, it would take them all. If I selected one, perhaps the others would be spared. The thought made me sick. This wasn't a choice. It was coercion, manipulation. At exactly 3:17 a.m., I felt the temperature drop. Looking out into the darkness beyond the Toll Plaza, I saw it standing there, the Wendigo in its true form, antlers silhouetted against the night sky. It raised one elongated arm, pointing down the highway where the 3 vehicles had disappeared. The emergency phone rang. When I answered, the voice was clear and precise, no longer distorted or wet. "Your decision, Keeper." I took a deep breath. "None of them," I said firmly. "You get what we agreed to. 3 drops. No more." The hissing sound came through the line. "The hunger grows. The bargain changes." "Not for me," I said. "I won't choose who lives or dies. I won't be your executioner." "Then you will watch them all die," the voice replied coldly. "The family first. We will save the children for last. They taste sweeter when they've marinated in fear." My grip tightened on the receiver. "Wait," I said quickly. "I have another proposal." Silence on the line, but I could feel it listening. 3 drops of blood from me, freely given, every week instead of once a month. I closed my eyes, hardly believing what I was offering. More frequent feedings. That should satisfy the growing hunger without requiring a larger sacrifice. More silence, then. Insufficient. I thought frantically. What if I found others willing to make the same deal? Other toll workers? A small consortium of keepers, each giving a little, so no one has to give everything. A sound came through the phone that might have been a laugh. "You would share your burden? Spread the corruption?" Interesting. "Not corruption," I countered. "Protection. A distributed system where no one has to become a monster to keep the monster at bay." The line went dead. I looked out the window to where the Wendigo had been standing, but it was gone. Seconds later, it appeared directly outside my booth. Its face pressed against the glass, those black mirror eyes fixed on mine. I held up the coin, then pulled out my pocket knife. Without hesitation, I made a small cut on my thumb, deeper than last time, ensuring a good flow of blood. I let 3 drops fall onto the coin, then 3 more, then 3 more. 9 drops, I said aloud, freely given. Triple the offering. Take it and leave those travelers alone. The Wendigo's mouth stretched into a terrible approximation of a smile. It nodded once, a jerky motion that sent its antlers scraping against the ceiling of my booth. I cracked the door open and tossed out the coin. Like before, the creature snatched it from the air, and the blood was absorbed into its body in the lines of crimson light. It made that moaning sound of satisfaction, louder this time, more intense. It stared at me for a long moment, then spoke, its mouth moving wrong, the words coming out distorted, but understandable. "The bargain is modified, weekly offerings, more keepers." It tilted its head. "You have 1 month to recruit the first additional keeper, or the hunger will take what it desires." With that, it bounded away into the darkness, leaving me trembling in the booth. I spent the remainder of my shift thinking about what I'd done. I had avoided choosing the sacrifice, but at what cost? I'd committed myself to weekly blood offerings and promised to drag others into this nightmare. But maybe that was the answer. Not one person carrying the full terrible burden of the keeper, but many sharing the load. A network of willing participants making small sacrifices to prevent greater horrors. When dawn came, I drove straight to Margaret's house. She answered the door in a bathrobe, clearly just awakened. It wanted me to choose. I said without preamble. 3 vehicles. It wanted me to select which one it would take. Her face paled. What did you do? I negotiated. Weekly blood offerings instead of monthly. And I hesitated. I promised to find others willing to make the same bargain, to create a consortium of keepers. Margaret stared at me. You're trying to systematize it, to institutionalize the bargain. Is that crazy? She considered for a long moment. Number, it's actually brilliant. My grandfather always worked alone, the burden destroying him slowly. But multiple keepers, all making small contributions. She nodded slowly. It might work. It might be sustainable. Will you help me? I asked. Help me find others who would understand. Who would be willing. Her eyes met mine, searching. You're not running. You're not choosing victims. You're trying a third way. I have to, I said simply. I can't live with the alternatives. I'll help, she agreed. But Marcos, be careful. The Wendigo is ancient and coming. It may be allowing this new arrangement for its own reasons. As I drove back to my apartment, I thought about her warning. Was I being manipulated? Playing into some larger plan I couldn't see? Maybe. But I also knew I couldn't walk away now. Not after seeing those vehicles, that family with their children, knowing what might have happened to them. I was the keeper now, but I would redefine what that meant. I would find a better way to maintain the balance. And hopefully, when I returned to booth 19 tonight, I would not be alone in my vigil. 6 months have passed since that night in booth 19, when I refused to choose a sacrifice. 6 months of weekly offerings. 3 drops of blood on the ancient coin, now joined by similar offerings from others. We call ourselves the Keeper's Council. There are 7 of us now. Margaret was the first to join, followed by Ernesto after I finally told him everything. Then came Bill Thornton, my supervisor, who admitted he'd known about the Wendigo for years, but had been too afraid to speak of it. A highway patrol officer named Ramirez joined after witnessing something on the road that his rational mind couldn't explain. 2 others came later, locals with family histories intertwined with the entity. We meet weekly in the back room of Kreutz Market after closing hours. The owner, an elderly man named Schmidt, provides the space without questions. I later learned his grandfather had been part of a similar group in the 1920s, before the Great Depression scattered them. The system works better than I could have hoped. Each of us makes a small offering, 3 drops of blood on a silver coin, on a rotating schedule. No single person bears the full burden. No one has to choose sacrifices. The Wendigo seems satisfied with this arrangement, or at least accepting of it. The disappearances along SH-130 have stopped completely. The strange occurrences at booth 19 have diminished to almost nothing. The rules are still followed, but they feel more like precautions now than desperate measures. But I don't fool myself that this is over, or that we've somehow tamed the hunger that walks. In our research, Margaret and I discovered similar arrangements throughout history. Consortiums of willing participants making regular small sacrifices to keep the entity fed. None lasted forever. Eventually, something always went wrong. Someone broke faith. Someone tried to use the Wendigo for their own purposes. Someone got greedy or afraid. And then the hunger would break free, taking what it wanted, how it wanted, until a new bargain could be established. I still have the dreams. We all do now. The toll booth at 3:17 a.m., the Wendigo watching from the darkness. But in my dreams, it's no longer alone. Other shapes stand with it now, just beyond the light. Human shapes, with glints of silver in their hands. Last week, I noticed something troubling. The coin demanded more. 4 drops instead of 3. When I mentioned this at our council meeting, others reported the same experience. The hunger grows. Always. I don't know how long our arrangement will last, or what will happen when the small sacrifices are no longer enough. But for now, we maintain the balance. We keep the roads safe. We are the keepers. If you're driving on SH 130 late at night, and you come to booth 19, pay your toll and move on quickly. Don't ask why the collector has a silver coin on the counter. Don't comment on the small bandage on their thumb. Don't ask about the rules they follow. And if you see headlights flashing in a pattern, or a blue pickup with the license plate LVS2HNT, or something tall and wrong moving through the fields beyond the toll plaza, pretend you don't see it. Keep driving. The hunger is patient. The hunger is watching. The hunger is always seeking new keepers. And it's been looking at you for some time now.